Descent of the Demon God. By Hanjo Wiolia. Chapter 162. Variable. Part 1. The Kraken, an alpha hazard entity presumed to be an S-class, died and fell back into the ocean. Everyone had seen it die, and their eyes were filled with greed. An S-class core, which was so incredibly difficult to find that it was impossible to set a price, but to Murim warriors, it was the highest treasure. Where did that monster go? Did it disappear? The energy that suppressed everyone in every direction dissipated as some doubted the identity of the golden gumiho, but they couldn't see the majestic fox anymore, so they looked at the Kraken instead. But their attention was only on the gumiho for a while. Seeing the gravity witch, Becky, and Ark Young approach the beast, they held themselves back. "What is it doing?" Becky asked, puzzled while looking at the golden fox that was poking through the corpse of the Kraken. Yusowa replied. "Probably looking for the core." Core? Becky had no idea about this era's strange occurrences, and with him coming from the past, it would be even stranger if he knew about the gates and cores. Ark Young tried to articulate the ideas in a way that Becky could understand. Cores are like a dantian of such beings. Ah. Got it. Becky nodded to show that he understood. That fox, too, must be a spirit creature then, but it's unusual for one to be aiming for another spirit creature's dantian. Hearing Becky's words, Ark Young wasn't sure how to explain the tiny fox's identity as one of the three yokai, which was different from other creatures. Becky asked Ark Young, who kept answering him, "Is that fox my lord's pet?" Ark Young was flustered at the question, and tried to change the topic. "Ah. I think there was a person teacher asked me to secure, so I'll go ahead and check on him first." Ark Young looked at the golden gumiho, searching through the corpse of the Kraken. Even though she looked rather cute, she was very mean to everyone apart from Chen Yoan. It would be best not to touch her. Fat. Ark Young hurriedly moved and headed to the collapsed dome. Joe Hoagie, one of the 10 members of MS Group, was still in there with his blood points sealed. He was put in a safe room to avoid the chaos and danger of the fights outside. Why's he acting like that? Becky was puzzled at Ark Young suddenly moving away, to which Yusowa whispered. "Because he hates talking about the fox. It's better to not mention it." Becky sighed as if he couldn't understand. However, he figured that if the fox had such immense power, then the outstanding fear of his comrades was justifiable. How did the Lord tame that fox? He saw the fox find something the size of a human body that was glowing with a dazzling light. The core. It was the core of Kraken, an S-class alpha entity. Found it. The golden gumiho excitedly jumped and licked the core, thinking about using it to recover her energy that was drained and regrow the 2 tails that had been cut off too. Shoo! The tails of the gumiho grew even bigger and wrapped around the core as she began to absorb the vast energy inside it. Goo! As the energy was absorbed, an even stronger golden light shone from her. The fox purred in delight. Becky, who saw the fox's growth, mumbled. "Is it not a fox?" He couldn't figure out why it was acting like a cat. Yusowa tilted her head when Becky turned somewhere with a darkened expression. "What?" Yusowa asked Becky, who acted strangely. "What is it?" "The people around us have vanished." "People?" Confused, she looked around. As Becky stated, the people who were on the speedboats just a moment ago were nowhere to be seen. Where did they all go? The sea was frozen and the speedboats were stuck, so it didn't make sense for all of the people to have simply disappeared. Shoo! Someone approached so fast that they left after images. It was a middle-aged man with a dark blue hood, sunglasses, and a mustache, Kahaku. He must be a warrior from the east. Becky recognized the technique in an instant, to which Kahaku asked.
見たのか?
Did you see that? Since Becky didn't know Japanese so he couldn't understand, Kahaku tried speaking in horrible Chinese. See that? While back, people disappeared. Unlike them, who had their eyes on the Kraken, Kahaku witnessed the people disappearing right before his eyes. They all suddenly vanished as if they were sucked somewhere else. Realizing that something strange was happening, Kahaku escaped so fast he looked invisible, trying to give himself enough time to grasp the situation. What's going on? Yusawa frowned at the ominous feeling. Around 150 people who came had disappeared in an instant. This. Becky hurriedly moved in the direction of the dome. Back at the collapsed safe room, inside was a fainted Joe Hoagie. Shoo! Ark Young brought him out, checked the pulse, and sighed in relief when he was sure the man was fine. It seemed like he just hit his head during the shaking and fell on the ground. Should I bring him? Ark Young carried him over his shoulders and exited out of the safe room, lightly stepping on the broken floor to climb out. Then, he suddenly felt something behind him. What? The moment he looked, he suddenly felt a presence behind him. Behind? Ark Young moved back right away. Huang. The propulsion from his movement caused part of the dome to collapse, but luckily no one was there. A ghost? It was strange that he couldn't feel the mysterious entity, but a voice from behind said, "I recommend you put down that burden on your shoulders." It was a slightly hoarse voice, with an underlying threatening tone. Ark Young asked without turning his head. "And you are? You don't need to know. If you say that, you must be from MS Group." Ark Young stepped forward and tried to use the knocked-up debris as a defense, but in that brief moment, something unknown flew towards them. Confused, Ark Young moved to the side. However, Joe Hoagie, who was on his shoulder, disappeared. What is this? It didn't feel like he was pulled away from his hands, but the voice then asked, "Where would you like to go?" What? Whoop. At that moment, everything in Ark Young's sight spun as he felt a strong sense of moving, as if his body was being sucked into something. Something unbelievable happened the moment Ark Young tried to get rid of this foreign energy. Wing. There was a cold wind on his skin. It looked like it was nighttime, but he wasn't sure. The whole area was white and snowy, and even the mountains around were dyed in white. Up until that moment, he had been on a ship in the middle of the sea. Where am I? Ark Young opened his eyes and tried to move, but the only thing he could see around him were the mountains, covered in snow. Ark Young opened the phone on his wrist and checked his coordinates. Seeing them, he felt like he had been hit in the head. Ru. Russia? His location was in the middle of Russia. In the blink of an eye, he went from Shanghai to Russia. At the same time, the dome of the auction house. Bang! Part of the dome was destroyed, along with a loud sound. Debris was thrown in all directions. Someone could be seen through the debris and dust. It was Becky. Where is he? Becky, who felt that something was off, witnessed his own eyes, Ark Young, disappear as if he was sucked somewhere. Becky attacked the opponent without another thought, but the man suddenly disappeared. Where? He tried to detect the man, but at that moment felt something behind. Huh. Becky stretched out his hands towards the weird energy. Patch check. At that moment, there was a flash of lightning, causing sparks to scatter everywhere. Becky frowned, as his opponent was nowhere to be seen. Where is he? Becky tried to concentrate on finding the opponent. When he felt the foreign energy again, it was exactly where he was standing. Quack. Fat. Becky tried to move his body to the side right away, but in that brief moment, the place he was just at shook. What is this? It was strange. Startle. Becky kicked towards the unknown energy that he felt. Then he formed the invisible kick. Bang! The area that was hit shattered and broken, but Becky's expression wasn't good. Since he had used the invisible kick, he thought he would at least unveil his opponent's presence, but it was to no avail. Where is he? Becky moved at high speed to find the man. At the western end of the ship, far from Becky. The space shook, and a man with curly hair, a white researcher suit, and black horn-rimmed glasses appeared. Huh. Drip. Blood dripped from the man's nose as the veins on his forehead were popping out. Like a ghost. He was trying to send Becky to a different location, but somehow, Becky kept sensing his intent and moving away. He was confident he could send Becky away if he had more time, but his brain was overloaded from using this ability too much. I need to accomplish my mission. The man looked at the ship that was 300 meters away, where the real body of Chai Muntak, one of the MS members, was. Whoa! The space shook and the figure of the man disappeared. Chai Muntak's point of view. A large number of people were gathered in the wheelhouse, and since there was a very audible roaring and windows being smashed, it wasn't impossible for them to notice something wrong. Senior researcher. However, they didn't enter the wheelhouse because Chen Yowen, who was standing there, had sliced off Chai Muntak's arms. Among all of them, there is no one who can save me. Chai Muntak was desperate. Everyone was afraid after they witnessed Chen Yowen's skills in the dome, now knowing that this man was able to take down the 4th gen humans. Tell me where you guys are from and what you're trying to do. Chen Yuan deliberately asked the question because no intention of keeping the man alive. All he wanted was for this man to think of the answer. I will not say. Chai Muntak answered, with his face full of fear. He didn't want to beg for his life when so many of his subordinates were around, to which Chen Yuan smiled. It doesn't matter. Who is your lead? It was then. Shu. The space shook and someone appeared in the wheelhouse, the man with the curly hair, white researcher suit, and glasses. HM? Chen Yuan narrowed his eyes at the sudden appearance of the man, whose movement he couldn't sense. Chai Muntak's face instantly brightened. The curly-haired man was one of the 10 MS group executives, and was one of the 2 most powerful. He's alive. The reason why Chai Muntak was happy was simple. While he wasn't suitable for combat, he had a space mobility assumed to be at the SS class level. He had the ability to move not only himself, but also people and even monsters as well, with no constraint. Of course, he could only move to places he had been to, and overusing the ability would cause his brain to overload. Nonetheless, it was safe to say he was one of, if not, the best. You all must leave. He reached out to those outside the wheelhouse, who all disappeared in an instant. They really disappeared. Chen Yuan frowned at the sight, as his senses confirmed their disappearances when he couldn't detect anyone around. What are you? At his question, Yi laughed. Don't rush me, Chen Musong. Even if you don't want to, we will meet sooner or later. With that, he reached for Chai Muntak. Who says you can do what you want? Chen Yuan tried to stop it. It's no use. At that moment, the space shook and Yi's view rotated. He didn't intend to fight with Chen Yuan, knowing how strong Chen Yuan must be if he could deal with Becky. His objective was Chai Muntak. Whoa! His view changed to reveal a large hall with a round table in front. Sitting in that hall were 4 men and 1 woman, all in white research suits. Drip. Quack. He staggered and grabbed the table, feeling like his brain was going to explode. However, he was able to achieve his purpose. He spoke to the others in researcher clothes. HIA. Ha, even I escaped. What a shitty business. All this hard work just to save the person who ruined our plans. He frowned. It was unpleasant to see the 4 men staring at him with stern expressions. What's up with you guys? At that, the middle-aged man with thin eyes asked, whom did you bring with you? Yi turned right away, hearing his heart beating quicker with each passing second. You, how? The person behind him was none other than Chen Yuan. He was only aiming to bring Chai Muntak, so it was no surprise to say he was shocked. Chen Yuan smiled and said, "It's been too long, MS Group." Chapter 163. Variable. Part 2. 30 seconds ago. Chen Yuan saw Yi move people in front of him, and it was then that he grasped the foreign energy. He was able to quickly realize that this foreign energy was very similar to the ability he had. Spatial movement? Chen Yuan obtained the ability to move 15 meters in space, deemed teleportation, from one of the demons, which was how he recognized the situation vaguely. In just a few seconds, he once again displayed his ability to move through space with himself and another person at the same time. Whoa! Now! In that instant, Chen Yuan threw Chai Muntak to the side and moved to the point the space distorted, giving up spatial control over his body to enter Yi's teleportation. Once his surroundings changed instantly, Chen Yuan smiled. "I think I've figured it out." Yi's ability was a long-distance spatial movement. This allowed Chen Yuan to understand the principle beyond teleportation. Normally, it was absolutely impossible, but his knowledge of the principle of teleportation and his understanding of space through the realization of the universe played a big role. How did this happen? On the other hand, he couldn't understand what had happened. The ally he had to bring wasn't here, but rather the enemy came with him. Damn it! Embarrassed, he showed his ability by force. As their location was one that only MS Group should know. Go back. Whoa! However, something unbelievable happened. The space where Chen Yuan was standing distorted and then... Fat. The space returned to its original state. Yi's eyes fluttered. How? It felt like his head was going to explode due to the overload of his brain, but he still used his ability. However, when it didn't work at all, he couldn't hide his agitation. Then Chen Yuan said to him, "I roughly understand your ability." What? At that, Yi made an expression of disbelief. He even tried to figure out my abilities? His ability wasn't something that could be understood with common sense. Then through his ears came the voice of one of the men in the research suits behind him. It was just a call, but he understood the intention. Right. If there was nothing they could do to the man, they had to at least move their positions far away from him. Distort. Just one more use of his ability would overload his brain and he might collapse, but at least the situation would be better. He tried to quickly move the others in the room along with him. It was then. Ta-ta-tack. Uck. Before he could use the ability again, his blood points were sealed and he passed out. Even Becky evaded his ability only a few times. Chen Yuan, who was overwhelmingly stronger than that, was capable of moving faster than anyone else at such a short distance. If I turn him into a ghost, he will definitely be very useful. Chen Yuan understood the principle of spatial movement, but moving others was a completely different matter. If the ghost could use the spatial movement ability, he would then be able to utilize it without space constraints. Quite literally the best ability. It was definitely worth coveting. Quack quack quang. The space 3 meters around Chen Yuan was twisted, and then it was torn from the floor to the ceiling, and the whole part disappeared in a round shape. Humph. How dare you run wild after coming here? A man in his mid-30s, with brown hair, reached out his hand. This was his ability, compress. His ability allowed him to compress and completely destroy everything in that space. It was a monster-like ability that could reach up to 100 meters, but if that happened, even the people in the conference room would be swept away, so he only showed this much. Good job, Kay. The thin-eyed man praised him. It was unfortunate that Chen Yuan's power would be lost when killed, but killing him seemed better than keeping him alive. Wait. Isn't that E? At that moment, a man in a research suit pointed towards the entrance of the conference hall. There was a man lying on the floor in a strange position. From just the curly hair, it was definitely E. When did he? Tack. At that time, someone placed a hand on K's shoulder. K unconsciously turned his head, and Chen Yuan was behind him. Heek. You're doing funny things. Flustered, K turned his head without even thinking about the distance and tried to use his ability, but... Grab. Crack. Quack. Chen Yuan grabbed his wrist and ripped it off his shoulder. Noisy. He proceeded to grab K by the face and threw him to the floor. Quang. You. Among those wearing researcher suits, there were not only people with abilities. Among them was a short-haired woman with a pretty good appearance and a mole on her forehead who flew at Chen Yuan's neck from behind. But, Her hand that was swinging the dagger was stopped by Chen Yuan's internal energy, and unable to understand what happened, she decided to change her attack. Then... Wing. At that moment, her hand split open and a barrel machine gun was revealed, firing bullets right away. Ta-ta-ta-tang. She couldn't hide her surprise as the bullets that flew for just a few inches were stopped mid-air. SH. When Chen Yuan lowered his hand, all of the bullets fell to the floor. What's this? Chen Yuan spoke to her, who was shocked. It seems you're an avatar as well. She couldn't say anything to counter his point, because it was true. Her codename was F and she was the one who established the avatar technology, a genius in the development of machines, bioimplants, and humanoid androids. You're lucky. What? As soon as she asked, Chen Yuan's hand cut through her throat. Slash. As her neck was slashed, sparks and wires were revealed and her body crumpled to the floor promptly. Chen Yuan smiled. I'd like for you to experience decapitation. From F's mouth, a buffering mechanical voice was heard. This. It looked like her speaker was damaged. Chen Yuan grabbed the head of the avatar and said to Nano. Track the location. Yes. If the avatar was being controlled remotely, then Chen Yuan thought he could move to the location right away. While the location was being tracked, he could feel different energies flocking nearby. It was probably because of the loud chorus happening around him. Ta-ta-tack. Footsteps outside the closed door made clacking sounds that could be heard across several rooms. Hearing them, the man with thin eyes said to Chen Yuan, I advise you to stop right now. In response, Chen Yuan chuckled. You don't seem to understand the situation. No, you don't understand it. What do you mean? At his question, the man with thin eyes said, Is he in the parlor? Beep. A red dot appeared on the table and a voice said, He is in front of the door of the conference room right now, Senior Researcher D. The sound was from the speaker on the table, but Chen Yuan could hear the voice of someone right outside the door. The voice seemed to be quite an important one. D said, We have a little problem, Your Majesty Marquis Albert. Marquis? Chen Yuan frowned at the title, and the Marquis voice sounded once more. What's the problem, human? Human? Chen Yuan concentrated further on the conversation. Who would refer to people as humans? Someone stole the divine item and broke into the conference room. He's caused everything to go wrong. This is different from what we agreed to in the contract. The voice was low, and Chen Yuan could tell it was making the person named D nervous. We didn't know that he would want that, it was then. PHHHH. The door turned into ashes that scattered, revealing a blonde, exotic-looking man wearing a dignified blue suit in the style of European nobility. Thud. When the newcomer arrived, D immediately knelt down along with the others and said, This lowly human shows respect to His Majesty, Marquis. Without even replying, the ostentatious man walked into the room. He was simply just walking, but everybody in the room felt an intense intimidation. Looking at him, Chen Yuan asked, "Do you guys work with demons?" At the word demon, Di looked shocked. How did he know? He had never mentioned anything about the demons, and was perplexed when Chen Yuan mentioned them. At that moment, the Marquis looked at Chen Yuan and asked Di, "Is this the worm?" He condescendingly called Chen Yuan a worm, which was welcomed by Di, of course. Idiot. If you hadn't come here, you wouldn't have gone through hell. The being in front of him was superior to humans, and since they couldn't control them, they made a pact with them instead. Di carefully replied, "Why yes. / Quack." Before he could finish speaking, something had been sliced. At the sound of the blade, Di and the person next to him raised their heads while still kneeling. Something unbelievable had occurred. Marquis Albert had a bewildered expression with eyes wide open while a black line separated his body vertically. Then, JJKKK. The body slowly ripped to each side and then collapsed. Black smoke rose from the cup portions and the body turned to ashes. Di couldn't hide his shock at the sight. A Marquis of the demon clan, known as a monster among monsters, had died in an instant. No. Behind where Marquis Albert stood, Chen Yuan stood and said, "Why? Were you expecting to run away after throwing him at me?"